Nomi, is that like, from an activist standpoint, the job is to never be satisfied and to certainly not, negotiate with yourself just because the expectation. I mean, this is the reason why, despite the fact that this is the reason why I would not support Joe Biden in a primary. This is exactly the reason. But despite that, the point is you still pressure. Okay, so like, what does that look like is what I'm asking. Is like,
and by the way, that was our argument to everybody. Like, let's just be very clear. People showed up and our argument, right, every day about, well, we can pressure him. But now people are like, oh my God, they're signaling Rahm Emanuel. Oh, what do we expect?
But wait a second. But I've seen. I mean, to the extent that, let's say, we can pressure, right? Mm-hmm. Like I've seen every member of the squad publicly go out there and talk about, Rahm Emanuel covering up the shooting of Laquan McDonald, and which I mean, frankly, the list of why I would not want Rahm Emanuel is not just because he did that. Frankly, in fact, I have a longer list and one that I think is more relevant to him being in the federal government, but that is the one that makes him even that much more toxic. I mean, that's the politics there, right? Is like, it's hard to sort of say like, hey, this is a guy who basically said F the left 15 years ago. This is a guy who wanted to cut bait on the ACA, like, cause it was too ambitious. This is the guy who basically, this is the guy who was, brought in to basically, break the kneecaps of anybody who's on the left. That to me is the compelling reason why you don't want him in there. But it is, from a political standpoint, describing all that and getting people invested in that is much harder than the fact that he was also engaged in this cover up. I mean, that shows he's also a piece of garbage in a slightly different way, I guess. But I mean, and
it's tone deaf for the moment on top of it. Just
right. And so
basic politics,
keeping Rahm Emanuel out and keeping out people who are Obama knots, but also, there's a range, right? Like aggressively anti-progressive through to just like, well, I mean, I'm not anti-progressive. It's just like there was an opportunity for me to get a job at Uber and to smash regulations. And so I took it, because I wanted, I wanted a place in Aspen. I mean, there's that, but that's like, that's like number two on the quadrant of people you want to keep out before you get to people who are going to actively fight for progressive stuff. But it seems to, and part of it is because who they're staffing all the sort of like tertiary, quaternary, I don't know, the lower level positions who are staffing up there. So, okay. So aside from that, like that's an example of what you're talking about, right? Like leverage, right? Or are you talking about something that's
it's not like we are, so there's so many different areas to pressure and expose, right? The squad exposing is great pressure, but specific unions who have real agenda items pressuring in an aggressive way, an open way. And like I said, maybe this is happening a little bit more behind the scenes and we're just not aware of it. But it's also not playing out like they're winning either. So it does show what kind of pressure is being put out there. There's like such institutional fear in the Democratic Party. There's institutional fear from very transactional unions that are clearly and understandably dependent on budgets and lots of things that they have to move to protect their workers, understandable. But there's also real leverage in pushing back against the Uber executives and the Tony Wests and all these folks who just passed Prop 2, what is it, 200 or 22?
22, yeah.
22, I already forgot. And now they're buying ads in New York newspapers to do to New York. Like they're trying to spread this, and there's no active, continuous campaign against what is very clearly Biden-esque policies at this point. This isn't like Biden's friends and family. This is now institutionalized in the administration that's about to take place. And so, yes, there's the squad getting angry and there are tweets and there are emails being blasted, which raise folks money. All of that stuff is valuable. But if we want to get to the core power, like the staffing issue, I mean, that's what Elizabeth Warren understood very well, right? is that personnel is policy. And up and down the line right now, there's very little indication that there's any recognition of the crisis of working people right now. I'm not talking about the left. Everybody's so obsessed with this like left centrist war, which is an electoral war. It's a war for power, even mentioning the Squad and Capitol Hill. I am talking about what concentrated power the left has in pushing the Biden administration. So Sarah Nelson understands power like nobody else, and frankly, in the last 50 years, I think. And she's been very open and I mean open in a way that like I was even surprised in her pressure of the Biden administration. But Janet Yellen, like they said that Janet Yellen was going to be something that the left and the centrists could agree on, somebody that they could agree on. Are you kidding me? The fact that they're saying that the Biden administration can get away with saying things like the left are terrorists right now, that they can get away with that, shows. But
I just don't know. I'm sorry. Like, who is it that you wanted to be Treasury Secretary?
Oh, Joe Stiglitz. There's a name right there. Let's just throw that one out. I don't know. There's plenty of people that could be on the list that could be pressured beyond Elizabeth Warren and whoever else. I mean, that's pretty much it that the left was putting forward. We have to be, we have to be more theoretical and creative with arguments. I'm not the one leading, I'm just saying like, it just feels like people got they just surrendered a bit and put all their energy into like, getting Bernie and Warren into places rather than really understanding what the failures of the Obama administration were. And granted, there are plenty of writers who are doing this. I'm not like there's a lot of folks who are saying this.
I'm still having a tough time sort of like grasping on like
so name an organization that's put forward. Organizations apply pressure. Not reporters, not us, organizations, unions apply pressure.
I think a lot of that has been centered around getting Bernie in at labor or getting
exactly.
Yes. And
that's a strategic dead end.
That's a strategic error, obviously. But to back up kind of what you're saying, Naomi,
Clyburn came out apparently and said he wants Sanders in Biden's administration, which is not.
Oh, great! This is smoke and mirrors. This is a mirage. This isn't real.
Yeah.
Like. Come on.
So David Dayen finds that the Prospect has learned that Brian Deese, an Obama official, now executive with the asset management giant BlackRock, is the leading contender to direct the National Economic Council. And he was literally directly involved in skirting activists away who were trying to get BlackRock, which is the leading fossil fuel investor in the world, to try to divest. And he was responsible for pushing them out and kind of like the PR there. So kind of flies in the face of Biden's more progressive than expected agenda on climate change as influenced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Sunrise Movement, who I would imagine will be vocal about this in the coming hours.
So on that note, I feel like their energy right now is less focused on the economic crisis that we're facing in workers and more on suppressing the rising left and giving the left any movement.
But Naomi, hold on for 1 second. Like, look, there's only two things that can happen here in terms of dealing with the crisis with workers, right? And that is directly tied into COVID. And you need to come up with two sets of solutions. One set of solution involves, if you have 50 senators, you can go in and you can pass a massive stimulus via reconciliation, and that can happen within the first 3 or 4 weeks, right? I mean, you have the template there. It's the HEROES Act, for better or for worse. And a lot of those things that are involving just expenditures are going to go in reconciliation. If you do not have those two senators in Georgia, the only thing you're doing is basically a slate of executive actions.
That would range. There's plenty of executive actions.
I actually think that it's probably, I would imagine that, and it's certainly, you can't do as much as you would want because it's just executive action. But I would imagine in the event that the Democrats don't win in Georgia, you're going to see more of a student debt relief than you would have had they just passed it via reconciliation, because that is going to be one of the mechanisms in which you can create stimulus to the economy. I mean, one of the things that I think, speaks to the value of having a Yellen as opposed to Stiglitz, who doesn't know, has not had, for instance, who's not worked in a place like Treasury, doesn't know, is that the big thing is, how do you rescue essentially this whole thing that Mnuchin is pulling back? If there's, because in the scenario where we don't win in Georgia, there's no way to do any stimulus. McConnell's not going to do shit.
Right.
And so you've got Mnuchin pulling back those loan guarantees for states and cities. It's also corporate as well, but it's states and cities. And as much as the states and cities have not used that loan guarantee, the fact that it's existed has been able to maintain the value of their bonds because there's a backstop there, even if it's theoretical. And so you need somebody who's going to be able to go in there and on day one, be able to work it out with the Fed so that those things still exist. And so, I think part of the problem is that there's literally the country's on fire. And the question is like, who do you get in there who knows how, where,
stuff.
What?
This was the Obama argument though. Obama was like, the country's on fire. We need people who institutionally understand how to fix Wall Street. And that was their argument. Like, we're falling for the same. All I'm saying is I understand, but this is a problem when we're so reliant on institutional knowledge that got us to this place.
Well, that's what was so effed up about electing Donald Trump this argument was what I was saying 4 years ago. There's some things that are just sort of, there's a certain inevitability. This guy was able to put us into a hole such that it's going to make it that much harder for progressives to get in there because there is such an obvious argument that you need people like, that's like, it's the same argument with Ron Klain. It's like, yeah, you know what? I do want the guy who organized the last pandemic. I want somebody who's...
He didn't F it up. Like, let's just be very clear. Putting Ron Klain in he managed it well. He didn't break apart, like push for gig worker economies and
Right.
All I'm saying is it's one thing to appoint somebody who actually managed a crisis properly. It's another thing to appoint somebody who managed a crisis that benefited Wall Street, took on unions, exacerbated student debt, exacerbated a housing crisis that already fueled our last economic disaster. So all I'm saying is, it's great to have people who have institutional knowledge. It's not great when you pick the people that had institutional knowledge that literally drove us into this crisis.
Did Yellen do that?
There's been a lot of complicated writing about her. I'm not saying that she's like, the worst of the worst as a Larry Summers, but she's a complicated legacy.
I agree.
Sam, just quickly, much like the national security establishment, except less so with economists, because you can find some outside of the mainstream that are doing the right thing. But in terms of people Biden was realistically picking, there isn't enough ideological diversity in that area. And she was someone who's respectable, at least.
I think, obviously, Elizabeth Warren would be a lot more proactive as Treasury Secretary. She was never going to get in there, and there was never going to be a Biden administration that was going to aggressively go after that. But Yellen was in favor of more regulation on the banks following the crisis. She got more hawkish when she became Fed chair, but that's a slightly different perspective than being one of the Fed governors, or as it were. And she's supposedly backed off that hawkishness. I just think that yes. Would I prefer a progressive Treasury Secretary? Would I have preferred Warren? Yes, although I do think there's a problem with having Baker appoint somebody to fill her seat essentially in Massachusetts. But and I hear what you're saying. I don't know how. I can't quite figure out how would we see beyond keeping out the worst of the worst? Where is this leverage that exists? And why obviously like the left, if the left had that much leverage, it wouldn't be Joe Biden.
It's not about the left's leverage. It's about the moment. The moment is the leverage. The moment that we're in, the economic crisis that we're in, the solutions, as far as I can see, and as far as been written everywhere, even in the Wall Street effing Journal, is that he is not taking the appointments are not taking this crisis seriously enough. The crisis is the leverage. And who can push and pressure through this economic crisis is, every union leader in America.
I just don't know what those appointments are yet. I mean,
listen, I don't either. And I think we should probably map it out. It'd be really interesting the way that we map out like states, actually map out the names of all the appointments so we can keep track of them. But even like, they come in, like you said, with their own staff. From like, I'll give you an example of just a simple one. Like when the DNC chair took over, Tom Perez, he brought in all of his staff from labor. Institutional people who really didn't understand politics, to be completely honest. So it's really in these like little appointments. That's where the leverage is, because it's embarrassing. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But if we start saying like, if it's all about Bernie and Warren, as we've discussed, it's just like bad strategy 101.
Yes, but I think
one more thing. I think they're more concerned with killing the energy of the left, whatever exists, as loud as we are, as organized or like loosely organized as we can be. It has been a hindrance on them. It's been a pain in their ass. And I think that they're doing all that they can in different ways to make sure that we can be stifled. And that is as simple as not acknowledging us. That's as simple as Jess Morales, a union leader, saying that we're all terrorists when she was on the left with us like 2 months ago. I think they're very concerned about a growing force showing up on the streets and doing exactly what we promised we would do. You know what would stop that? If they actually made some real concessions.
Well, I agree. I mean, people should be pushing. What groups, what unions or PACs or areas that you feel should be doing more that aren't?
Everyone?
Spill the tea. Give me some names.
Listen.
What is everyone? Everyone around me is just like a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Listen, I want to be careful about this, but I've said this before. It would be really great if there was some sort of unionized labor perspective, not unionized like lowercase union, like big union of labor coming together and putting forward a set of demands that are just unequivocal and basic, and getting some real public pressure behind that, including lawmakers and folks signing on. Yeah.
Aren't the unions like, I mean, I would imagine you're going to get your teachers unions are focused like a laser on just like who is going to be the Secretary of Education, right? Like, cause they want to make sure that they're there is, I'm just, okay. All right. So
another side of this is, I think another thing that's happening is folks are doing a lot of stuff backroom, right? And I'm even like cautious about what I'm saying right now. A lot of this is happening backroom, giving the Biden administration the benefit of the doubt during this transition. But like, this is where the power lies. This is where the pressure really,
this is like a form, it's function type of thing. Because you're criticizing people for not getting out there, being vocal about it. You're being quiet about it too.
Well, I'm not a union leader. I don't want to call out I'm generalizing for a reason, but all I'm saying is that if I just gave you an example, if there were say 5 unions that came together, their membership signed on to a set of demands that all of them can, are influenced by, and progressive lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers across the country sign on to things that they stand by because they stand by those unions and they stand by those policies. And it's not something that necessarily could, might be the most controversial thing, but it's showing that the administration is taking this economic crisis seriously. And to that point, every day, Joe Biden should be getting on air and talking about it. Just that alone.
Yes, I don't know.
I was hammering during the campaign. Why was he not on air talking about how we need more stimulus checks. We need more stimulus checks. We need unemployment insurance. It's McConnell. It's McConnell.
The entire
it's McConnell.
Democratic. I mean, like we're like.
Well, that would have exposed Nancy Pelosi's complete inability to come to an agreement with Mnuchin and then throw it to McConnell. But there
is an absolute a management of expectations that's going on here, which is like keep them low, and but that is, that's a second area, that right? I mean, that is like one is like politics as it creates expectations among the public, and the other is like an inside game as to who is going to get in with a certain amount of personnel, and that's like, there's only so much that we can do in that respect. I mean,
but the inside game is affected by the outside pressure.
No, I understand.
Or the union's membership.
I understand, and we talked to. We talked to David Dayen about, the process of him, for instance, reporting on this inside track. I mean, obviously, if somebody's coming out and saying that, who is it that he just, Brian Deese is up for the National Economic Council. That is basically a bat signal for people to get up in arms and complain about stuff like that. And, my sense is of Yellen is that she is not optimal, but is like, is the marginal difference between Yellen and whoever it would be, I can't even name a person, would be Treasury Secretary. Is that marginal difference, more important than maybe getting someone who's like genuinely progressive at HUD, or genuinely progressive at labor, or genuinely progressive, or, at least not pro austerity at the OMB. I mean, that's, those, in terms of the moment, those are the positions. And so it's sort of, I don't know if the marginal difference with Yellen would be worth it at that point, at this juncture. I don't know.
Well, HUD is, listen, January 1st, cities across America, you're going to have massive evictions
all over the place. Yeah.
Small business. Let's talk about that. In New York, in October, 80% of small businesses in New York City alone did not pay their rent. Can we process like what's actually happening right now?
Well, yeah, that is a failure, it seems to me, of what's going on in Congress.
Absolutely.
Of Pelosi's leadership and of Schumer's leadership. And, we're hearing at least Schumer, far be it from me, but Schumer's at least, he is putting out the fires where he sees them, where we light them, right? Like where, you see Dianne Feinstein, she steps down. Now it's Durbin, but it's better than Feinstein. Well, it is. I mean, honestly, she's just, atrocious. It's not a huge upgrade, but, and he's coming out with Warren and saying $50,000 on student debt, and that's going to make a difference. I mean, if it is executive actions, the only way to get any type of stimulus going, that $50,000 is going to be one end of the spectrum, and they're going to end up doing, I don't know, 20,000 or 25,000, and
because Biden's proposed $10,000 means tested one is like pretty crappy compared to the one being floated more by Schumer and Warren. But like, I feel like they need to remove all means testing and also should focus on canceling federal government loans. I don't understand why that isn't integral.
Doubt. I have very little doubt that if he doesn't have an opportunity to do this legislatively, they're not going to have a means test in there, because it's just going to be just incredibly cumbersome. By the time you set up that bureaucracy to do means testing in the context of an executive action, it's going to be.
That doesn't prevent Democrats from constantly being over the top with the bureaucracy, the means testing, COBRA, all of these Pelt grants, whatever. It's so in their DNA at this point. I'm hoping against it, but an executive action would have to be more sweeping. But that would require Biden to be a decisive leader, which I don't even know if he's proven that he's been very principled in anything, really, when it comes to just kind of pushing.
I think that's helpful.
Besides,
I think the fact that he's not principled is actually helpul.
It's a double-edged sword in that area. But that's why I think it was
Doug Henwood of all people. Gotta say, Joe could have done a lot worse than Yellen.
Sure. Of course he could have, but like, I guess you guys are missing. Like, if we start to say like, well, this is just like
I'm
being numb
about
to
Yellen,
Trump.
but I mean, if he's put, that's the thing is that like, I think particularly at the context of like Treasury, like that is a win. I mean, I think it could have been, that is a win. Like stopping the not the worst is actually a win. We lost this fight already. We are like, there's a certain amount of bailing water here. And Yellen is, at the bottom line is that like, look, there's only so much room for Treasury and the Fed to do anything at this point, right? Like Treasury, the best thing that she's going to be able to do is to salvage that thing that Mnuchin has pulled back. There's just only so much that can happen in this instance. You need to have the Senate. You need to have the Senate spend the money. And if they don't spend the money, there's just no money. It's not happening. And then it just becomes a series of executive actions. And I think they're going to do anything because they're going to be desperate because of this situation that is like headed towards us like an oncoming freight train. And so, the idea is like, who do you get in there that's not going to stop stuff? like this moment, like the problem that we had then in the wake of the financial crisis is there was a lot of people in that administration who were going to stop stuff. They were going to stop. They were, Jason Furman, we need to like, we do $700 billion and then we immediately pivot. Those are the people you don't want in the room. You want the context and the situation and really in many respects, the conventional wisdom, which has changed dramatically in the 12 years since 2008. You want that to be the force. So you want to basically make sure that there's no obstacles to this moment defining what happens. And so like a person like Janet Yellen, who's not going to come in and my assessment, and I could be wrong. I've never met her. I've never been in the room with her, like all this stuff, just like from what I've read, is that she's not going to be the person to say, wait a second, we need to turn off the spigots. And and that's all because the thrust of this is going to be open the spigots. That to me is the default position that everybody's going to have. And so the problem's not that like we don't have enough like sort of like progressives in the Senate, let's say. The problem is that we have one or too many Joe Manchins who are going to stop it. And so within the context of the administration is like, how do you make sure there's not going to be somebody who's going to have the ability to sort of like stop the momentum. And so that's why, I mean, particularly for Yellen, that's my sort of sense, but